Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here. We're really excited that everyone could join us for our webinar today for this exciting new program, the Northern Biodiversity Research Program. We've been working really hard to get this program up and running, and we're really excited that there's been such great enthusiasm and support and interest from all of you and those who attended the first webinar as well and have been sending your questions. The response and turnout's been really great. So we're really excited to talk to you about the program today. So before we get started, I just want to do a few housekeeping things. And the first is to introduce you to our amazing team who are part of the Northern Science and Research Committee. So we have Allison Ronson, who's on the call today, and she's our program director. We have myself, David Bysouth, and I am the program manager. And then we have Sarah Cook, who's our grants coordinator. And we've all been really excited to bring you this program today and talk to you more about it. So another housekeeping thing in terms of questions, we're really excited to hear all of your questions and all of your concerns and all of your thoughts about the program. And we'd love for you to submit those in the chat box. And then at the end or towards the end of our session, we'll have a Q&A session where we'll read off the questions from the chat box and do our best to answer those. And Allison and I will both be answering your questions today. And we'd like to encourage more like program-oriented questions about the scope, the eligibility, stuff like that. For more project-specific queries, you can email me at david.bysouth@westonfoundation.ca. So I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda for today's webinar. So first, we're going to go over the Weston Family Foundation objectives and go a little bit over the background of the foundation. We're then going to move into the overview of the Northern Biodiversity Research Program. We're then going to discuss the application process and some more of the finer details about the LOI and the proposal. We're then going to have our Q&A session where, again, we encourage you to submit any and all questions that you have. And then we're going to end the webinar today by discussing some next steps for applying to the program. So to give some context about the Weston Family Foundation, it's the private philanthropic foundation of the Weston family, and it's been around for quite a long time, over 60 years, and this has resulted in over 3,500 grants that have been awarded, which amounts to more than $600 million of total funds that have been donated. And we currently have about a $60 million annual giving target, but this has been on the rise in recent years, and we're excited to hopefully keep pushing that number forward going forward. So the Weston Family Foundation invests in innovation and learning in health and landscapes to deliver measurable impacts to the well-being of Canadians. But the well-being of Canadians is a super broad concept, so the foundation did their best to divide this into two different pillars, which is healthy aging and healthy ecosystems. But these are still relatively large concepts, so this has resulted in the division of four distinct committees within the foundation. On the healthy aging side, we have the Weston Brain Institute, or the Neuroscience Group. We have the Weston Family Microbiome Initiative. And then on the healthy ecosystem side, we have the Environmental Stewardship Group, or the Conservation Committee. And then we have what our team is representing today, which is the Northern Science and Research Committee. And the Northern Science and Research Committee was created in 2007 with a goal to significantly restore and protect biodiversity in Northern Canadian landscapes by funding research, protecting ecosystems, and connecting Canadians to nature. So what does that actually mean, and what does that look like in terms of our funding approach? So the Northern Science and Research Committee has two distinct strategic corridors that we build funding programs that fall under. So the first is research and training, and we're building a better understanding of northern ecosystems and supporting the next generation of northern scientific leaders and conservation stewards. So that's what the Northern Biodiversity Research Program falls under that we'll be talking about today. And then we also have our land use planning and policy strategic corridor, where we are investing in organizations that engage in evidence-based advocacy to further the conservation of ecosystems and improve conservation policies. So these two strategic corridors allow us to have a lot of flexibility in the types of funding programs that we put out, And like I said, the Northern Biodiversity Research Program falls under that research and training strategic corridor, and we'll be discussing that more today. So let's go over some important things to know about the Northern Science and Research Committee. So the first is that the application process is interactive. So applicants are encouraged to connect with the foundation to discuss their LOIs and proposals. And we really encourage you to submit your ideas and your questions because we'd love to be able to provide feedback and answer any questions or concerns you have about your project. And this was definitely taken advantage by a lot of people since the last webinar, as we've been getting a lot of great and interesting emails coming in. So we'd love to see even more of those come in before the LOI deadline. So also funds are provided in tranches. So funding is subject to successful completion of milestones set out by the applicant and agreed to by the foundation. So we encourage the completion and establishment of these milestones during the proposal stage and when the grant is initiated, so that there's these tangible milestones to be hit along the way, and subsequent tranches of funding will be provided upon the completion of those milestones. And the third thing to know is that the review process strengthens applications. So reviewer suggestions are used to support strengthened proposals following LOI selection. And we have a great team of reviewers from a diverse range of northern fields of research and across different geographies. And they're all looking forward to reading and supporting a lot of these LOIs and proposals going forward as well. So that was a little bit about the Weston Family Foundation and the Northern Committee and some of the objectives that we have. We're now going to talk about kind of why we're all here today, which is to give an overview of the Northern Biodiversity Research Program. So I'm going to give a little bit of context about where this program kind of came from. So as I mentioned, the Northern Science and Research focus area of the foundation has supported high quality novel research in Northern Canada since 2007. And since that time, a flagship program of the Northern Science and Research focus area has been the Weston Family Awards in Northern Research, which have supported over 350 graduate student and postdoctoral fellows, which amounts to about $11 million invested over that time span. And kind of building on that history and established network of researchers, the Northern Biodiversity Research Program is expanding our Northern research funding to new research that will have on-the-ground conservation impact. And the photos you can see on this slide are just a representation of a very small subset of those 350 graduate students who have all been doing amazing work in Northern Canada. So the program scope for the Northern Biodiversity Research Program is to support applied Northern natural science research that is used by decision-making bodies for improved Northern biodiversity outcomes. I'm just going to warn you all right now that I'm going to be using words like applied Northern research and decision-making bodies a whole lot. So that's why they've been highlighted here. And we're going to go into more detail about what these terms mean and how they fit within this program. So the goal of the Northern Biodiversity Research Program is to provide funding to Northern research projects that seek to create biodiversity-related knowledge and turn that research into conservation impact. And we're going to be talking a lot about that relationship between creating research and then moving it through the pipeline to an impactful conservation stage. And in terms of what the funding looks like for this program, we're offering a minimum of $600,000 to a maximum of 3 million Canadian dollars for applied research projects that span up to 3 years in length. And again, we're really going to focus on that pipeline of turning that research into impact by translating it through the pipeline to decision makers and decision-making tables, which we'll talk a bit more about later on. So in terms of the geographic scope, we've created this map here that outlines the terrestrial and marine boundaries for the program. So the terrestrial north is anything north of the southern boreal line that you can see on this map. And then the marine north is encompassed by these 6 marine bioregions. So if you have any questions about the geographic scope, you can always reach out to me at the email address I provided earlier. And you can also find this map and some more details about the geographic scope on our website in the program details section. And if you want to know specifically if you're kind of on that cusp area, like will my project be eligible, you can email me and I can double check and confirm whether or not your project is eligible for you as well. So we have three funding priorities for the Northern Biodiversity Research Program. The first is that we're going to support projects that focus on population, ecology, health, disease, contaminants, and management studies of species of importance for northern ecosystems. The second funding priority is that we're going to support projects that focus on the response of ecosystems to the impacts of climate change. And the third funding priority is the impact of anthropogenic activities on species or ecosystems. And you may note that these are pretty broad, wide scoping funding priorities. And that's because we know that to answer a lot of biodiversity related questions, that requires a lot of different approaches, a lot of different focus areas, and also a lot of different scales of research. So one of the common questions we've been getting is, does my really micro scale project fall into the eligibility for this program? And the answer is, yeah, we'd love to see projects come in on a variety of different scales, whether you're studying soil microbes or whether you're studying whole boreal processes. We'd really love to support and see projects that encompass those different scales of ecology. Also, we're not just focused on animal-based studies. We'd love to see plant proposals come forward, microbial proposals come forward, or anything in between that focuses more on ecosystem processes as well, like permafrost thaw, wildfire, or any of those that are impacted by climate change or anthropogenic activities. And again, if you have specific questions about whether your project meets these funding priorities, you can always reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer those questions. So in addition to those three funding priorities, we would like to see you demonstrate that your area is the study location for your project is in an area of high habitat value for wildlife or a key biodiversity area. So what do these high habitat value areas actually mean, or what do they look like? So some examples are things like habitat for endemic species, important bird areas, nesting, denning, or calving sites, or species migration routes or stopovers, or intact and connected land and seascapes. And we encourage you, for those who are studying kind of those connectivity-based projects, to really highlight how the land and sea interact with each other. But these are just examples of areas of high habitat value. If you think your area has reason for being considered high habitat value that's not included here, we'd be happy for you to justify that in your LOI and proposal if invited as well. So I'm now going to talk about some project must-haves and then talk about some project should-haves. So the first project must-have is that you have to generate research on protecting or restoring biodiversity. So I just want to double down on this and say that this is a natural science-based program. So while we really value the importance of social science and health science related research, this is a natural science-based based program. So we'd love to support research projects that fall under those more traditional, like natural science-based fields of study. Um, Also making sure that the project is in itself research-based. So this project is supporting primary research. Again, we really appreciate the importance of things like applied conservation projects or educational initiatives, stuff like that. But this program is strictly focused on supporting primary natural science research. So another must-have of this program is that it has to relate to northern conservation decision-making processes with potential to enhance conservation outcomes. And we're going to talk even more about this shortly, but this is a really fundamental component of this program. We're looking for that research to move from the research phase to the dissemination phase, and then move to conservation decision makers who are able to implement action at conservation decision-making tables. So another important component of this program is that it has to address a current opportunity or threat to biodiversity. So we'd love to see you justify that your program has novelty and it's timely in nature, and it's addressing some key fundamental question that is importance to northern ecosystems, communities, and biodiversity research in general. We also want to see that you have a capable team using appropriate methods and research design. So we'd hope that you could outline who is on your team and what their roles will be. We'd also like to see projects disseminate results and data publicly, whether that be through things like peer-reviewed papers, conferences, public outreach, non-peer-reviewed sources. All of these are important, and we really encourage data sharing and data openness. And then the final must-have is that it has to fit within some or all the funding priorities and geographic scope. So we just went over some of those funding priorities and geographic scope. And again, if you have questions about whether your project will fit under those criteria, you can send me an email and we can discuss that further. So now we're going to talk about some project should-haves, and these are really focused on supporting and engaging with Northern communities. So the first project should-have is that it should address and incorporate Northern community research priorities. So we'd really encourage co-design and co-production of knowledge with Indigenous communities or Northern partners when you're putting these projects together. Those are things like we'd really like to see in applications that are coming forward. We'd also like for projects to engage Northern communities in the research, including opportunities for training and knowledge exchange. So projects that put forward workshops or on the land activities or knowledge exchange activities with Northern communities are things we'd really like to support as well. And finally, we like projects to consider the available local Indigenous and scientific knowledge where appropriate. So if you're working directly with Indigenous or Northern communities, we like to see evidence that that Indigenous knowledge has been taken into consideration and used in the project design. So we're going to talk more about this moving research to impact component that I've mentioned a few times already. And this program is really focused on this partnership or relationship between the researcher and the policy and decision maker. So we're looking for projects that move research through the entire knowledge mobilization spectrum, where you start off doing the research itself. You then share that research in public forums and open data sources through things like peer review and non-peer reviewed sources. We're then looking for you to move that research to decision makers in an uptake phase. So these could be people like policymakers or groups or individuals who could develop a tool with your research. Any of these decision makers who we'll define more clearly in a little bit, who could then take your research and move it to an implementation phase where we're actually creating on-the-ground policies, practices, tools, conservation management, any of these things that will affect and significantly contribute to Northern conservation initiatives. So applicants must demonstrate that the research findings will be used or have a realistic potential to inform conservation policy or practice. And again, this is something we're going to really focus on when reviewing the LOIs to make sure this clear roadmap or plan has been put in place and that you have a clear indication of who these decision makers will be or who the partners will be that will help you move this research through this knowledge mobilization framework. So I've mentioned some of these terms a whole lot already, but I think it's finally time to actually define some of them. So the first is applied research or translational research. And this is a focus on practical, solution-oriented scientific methods to address specific conservation challenges in Northern Canada, aiming to protect and restore biodiversity and ecosystems. So again, this is doing research with the intention of not just putting it in a publication that will sit on a shelf or in the 21st century will sit on a website somewhere. We're hoping to do research here that actually can have tangible, measurable conservation impact. And speaking of that conservation impact, I've mentioned the term decision maker a few times. So if we're to define what a conservation decision maker is, this is a community or government department or representative that has the ability to make conservation decisions related to the management of species, ecosystems, industrial or commercial activities, or the protection or development of land and seascapes. And in terms of what a decision-making table or process is, this is a forum where decision makers and others can exchange information and negotiate to influence conservation decisions concerning species management, ecosystems, industrial activities, and land or seascape protection or development. So the decision maker is the group or body that can make the decisions, and the decision-making table or process is the form in which those decisions are made. So that was a broad overview of the Northern Biodiversity Research Program. Again, if you have any specific questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you have project-specific questions, you can feel free to email me. So now we're going to touch on the application process for the program. So we're going to start with eligibility. So applicants have to meet the following criteria. The first is that the applicant has to be a donee in accordance with the Canada Revenue Agency and Income Tax Act. So there's lots of information on the Canada Revenue Agency site about whether or not you would be a qualified donee. But again, if there's any confusion, feel free to email us. The research project also has to take place in the identified geographic area that we discussed earlier. The research project has to support applied biodiversity-focused natural science research. So we mentioned the different funding priorities that this has to fall under. And then the research has a demonstrated intention of being used with conservation decision makers or at conservation decision-making tables or processes. And again, I really want to emphasize this last point that we really want to see these concrete and plans that are put in place to move to the decision-making stage. So we're going to discuss the team and the team that may be applying now. So only one principal applicant per project is what we're looking for. But principal applicants can be supported by co-applicants and collaborators. But an applicant can only be the principal applicant for one project, but a principal applicant can be a co-applicant or collaborator on up to 3 projects. So if you are a principal applicant on project A, you can then also be a co-applicant or collaborator on project B and C, but you cannot be a principal applicant on projects A, B, and C. So organizations may submit up to 3 distinct projects, each with different principal applicants, but this does not apply to academic institutions. So professors or other researchers who are at universities or other academic institutions, there can be as many faculty from those institutions as needed to submit as many projects as you have available. But for organizations like NGOs, or other conservation-based organizations who are doing research, we'd ask that only 3 LOIs are submitted in total for distinct projects. So what does the application process actually look like? So it's a 2-step process. The first is the LOI, which is due on June 21st. And the second is the proposal, which is due on September 11th, if invited. So the LOI is roughly 3 pages of content focusing on the quality of the idea, eligibility, and scope of the project. And the proposal will be 10 to 12 pages of content plus supplementary data and CVs. And this will require 3, and we will fund approximately 3 to 15 proposals at this stage. So both of these will be adjudicated and reviewed by an expert external review panel, and they will both be submitted by email to northern@westonfoundation.ca. So in terms of what our reviewers will be looking for when reviewing the LOI and proposal, for the LOI, we're really focused on the idea and the partnerships. So first, we're going to be looking for, is it a fit for the program? Is there primary research that's happening? Are you within the geographic scope? Do you hit the other eligibility criteria? This is the first thing that reviewers and we will be looking for when evaluating the LOI. The second will be the experimental overview. Again, we want to see that primary biodiversity-focused natural science research, and we want to make sure there's a tangible and adequate plan in place to accomplish the outcomes that are outlined in the LOI. We also want to see that roadmap for research uptake. So again, how are you going to take your research, move it to conservation decision makers, who are then going to hopefully have a plan for implementation that protects and restores biodiversity in Northern Canada. And for all of these LOIs, we're going to be looking for potential for impact and likelihood of success. So we're going to really want to see, does your research project have potential to make a tangible impact in Northern Canada? And is it feasible and tangible for the timeline that you've outlined in your project in terms of likelihood of success? And in terms of what this looks like for the proposal, This is going to be more focused on the strength of the methods and the partnerships. So we're going to start by looking at the team and the resources, and we'd really like to see letters of support from the partners and the collaborators and the decision makers or community members that you're working with. We'd also like to see more robust research methods that our reviewers can dig into and make sure they're adequate and appropriate for the project that's being carried out. And then we'll look more for that quality of the uptake and implementation plan to make sure that it's feasible in the timeline that's been outlined. And then we'll focus also on budget and timeline. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we like to support the creation of milestones. So this will happen at the proposal stage as well. So here are some common reasons that LOIs will not be invited to the proposal stage. So the first is that the project is out of scope. We've gone over the geographic scope, we've gone over the funding priorities. So making sure that your research falls into the eligibility criteria and the scope of the program is very important. And this will be one of the first reasons we look for if a project does not move on to the proposal phase. Next, the project could be limited in its potential impact for northern biodiversity and ecosystems. So we're really looking for research that can have a meaningful impact in Canada's north. Another reason could be that there's a lack of focus or cohesion in various elements of the grant. So the project could be too exploratory. If it's a really theoretical based project that may not have a tangible impact to conservation decision making or other implementations that decision makers can use, that could be a reason that reviewers choose not to move it on to the proposal phase. And similarly, if the project is too ambitious for the timeline or the budget, this could be a reason that we choose not to move the LOI onto the proposal phase. So this I feel like I've hammered home a few times now, but we are really looking for that clear roadmap or plan to take research to decision makers. And if that plan isn't clear and outlined and tangible and very obvious about how the research will move through that knowledge mobilization pipeline, that will be a big reason why a lot of LOIs are not moved to the proposal phase. And then finally, if there's not a strong research component to the project, this will be a big reason as well why some LOIs are not invited to the proposal phase. So again, this project or program supports northern biodiversity focused natural science research, not necessarily social science research or applied conservation or education or anything like that. We want to see that biodiversity research focus really come through in the LOIs. So I'm going to give some information about program funding now. So this is a $14 million program budget. And like I said, we're going to look to fund between 3 to 15 projects. The number of awarded grants is contingent on the receipt of a sufficient amount of high quality applications. The funds will be granted only for direct costs that are justifiable for the work proposed. We do allow up to 5% for operational overhead. Project activities must be completed and funds used up over 3 years. And again, this is milestone-driven, tranche-based funding. So grants are conditional on grantees meeting predetermined milestones and providing deliverables. So I'm just going to quickly go over 5 of the frequently asked questions that we've been receiving so far. So can an applicant hold an additional grant for their project? And the answer to this is yes, if the activities in this application are distinct. So we really want to see that the funding from the Weston Family Foundation is being used for distinct outcomes and deliverables of the project that you're proposing. Can an applicant submit more than one application? Organizations may submit up to 3 applications for different projects with different principal applicants. What expertise is on the review panel? So experts from varied geographic regions covering a broad range of fields of northern study have been included on our expert review panel. When will applicants be notified of their awards? And this will happen in late October or November of this year. And finally, do you have to be a CRA qualified donee? And the answer is yes, either registered as or associated with a CRA qualified donee. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of the information regarding confidentiality. So the first is that interactions with the foundation are subjected to the foundation's standard non-disclosure agreement. The foundation treats LOIs, proposals, research projects, and associated research information as confidential information. Participating scientific reviewers are subjected to the foundation's standard non-disclosure agreement. Confidential information will only be used by the foundation and its scientific review committee. And then reasonable care is taken to protect confidential information from disclosure to third parties. So that was an overview of the Northern Biodiversity Research Program and some background on the application process. Again, if you have any questions associated to that, please put them in the chat. Or if you have specific questions related to your project, feel free to email me directly. We're now going to move into our question and answer period, where Allison and I will both be answering your questions. And we'd ask again that you try and keep the questions more to program related subject matters such as the scope, eligibility, application process, or the review process. And if you have specific kind of niche questions related to your project, again, we encourage that interactive process, and you can email me at david.bysouth@westonfoundation.ca. So now Allison's going to join me, and we're going to do our best to answer all the questions that you have.
Hi, everyone. And we do have quite a few questions already. So I'll start at the beginning with a question from Darcy. Would incorporating traditional knowledge or IQ fall into your definition of natural science?
Yeah, so we'd really encourage and support projects that incorporate traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge. As long as we're still seeing some of those like biodiversity related outcomes and deliverables, the methodology that's used to achieve some of those biodiversity related outcomes, incorporating indigenous knowledge, we'd really welcome projects that use that methodology as well.
From Vicky, can a researcher be on 2 proposals?
So a researcher can be on 2 proposals. So they can be the principal applicant on one proposal, and then they could be the collaborator or co-applicant on another. We just ask that the applicant is not a principal applicant on more than one LOI.
From Laura, is there a limit on team size?
I don't think we have I think we're flexible on the amount of people that are on a team. We'd ask that the team is big enough to have the capacity to achieve the outcomes that you're setting out to achieve. But as long as that's the case, then I don't see why there would be a limit on how many people could be on the team, especially if you're thinking about like including students or early career researchers who could learn a lot from the process as well. We definitely encourage that as well.
From Angela, are there specific criteria for the team, the type of expertise, minimum number of people?
Again, we're just looking for the team to be adequately suited to carry out the objectives that they've outlined, and again, move that research from research to decision makers to that implementation phase. So as long as the team incorporates the requisite like experience and knowledge to do that, then I think that's the most important thing.
From Kevin, is access to funding specific only to those within educational institutions?
No, we're open to applicants from NGOs, from Indigenous organizations, from government as well. So any of these different groups, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria and you're a CRA qualified donee or working with a CRA qualified donee, then we're really open to like a diverse range of perspectives and knowledges that are applying to this program.
Okay, a question from Laura. Is there a list of important species?
I think we'd leave that up to you to like tell us why the species you're focusing on is of importance for biodiversity, for ecosystems, for communities. We don't have like a tangible, like a set list of species that we're looking to focus on, especially since we're open to different scales of research and both plant and animal based research as well. So as long as you're justifying why you're focusing on what you're focusing on, I think that's the important part to consider.
Okay, from Gilles, can a single project have several components, each taking place in different locations?
So this again is kind of up to the discretion of the applicant. Like I said, organizations can submit up to 3 LOIs, and those would each inherently focus on distinct projects. if your question is rooted in the fact that your project is all encompassed by like a singular research question that requires like research to happen across multiple geographies, then I would say that that one should fall under one project or one LOI. But if you have three very distinct projects that are all happening at different geographies at different scales, then it might be best capacity wise to separate those into distinct LOIs. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, question from Darcy. Can co-management partners, local hunters and trappers organizations be listed as collaborators?
Yeah, we definitely encourage if you're working with hunters and trappers associations, indigenous communities, indigenous organizations, any other partners, we'd be more than supportive of you listing them as collaborators or even co-applicants in some cases.
Okay, Jason has asked if we'll share these presentation slides following the webinar, and we will not be sharing the slides, but we will be posting a video, a recording of one of the two webinars that we've given to our website following this one. Okay, a question from Tara. Will this be the only year that this funding is available?
So this is a 3-year program, so there will not be another call next year. But we're hopeful that if this program is successful in this first iteration, that we'll be able to have subsequent iterations of it in the future.
Okay, question from T. Murchie. Do paleo-ecology-based projects focused on understanding ecological change over long time scales with methods such as ancient environmental DNA fall within the scope of this program?
Yeah, so I've actually had a few questions come through the paleo ecology space already. And the answer to this is we'd love to see that the paleo ecology methodology is used to answer more contemporary questions. So, and that it's still biodiversity or ecosystem science driven. So we've had a few instances of people come forward with more paleogeography based projects, but they still have tangible implications for plant assemblages in modern day ecosystems. So we definitely support the integration of paleoecology or paleogeography kind of based projects, as long as there's still modern day biodiversity implications that can be translated to decision makers and decision making tables.
A question from Andrew. Does salary for team members, for example, a master's student or postdoc, count as a direct cost?
Yeah, this is another question we've gotten quite a bit already, and we will support salary for team members as long as the budget that's been outlined is feasible to address the outcomes and deliverables of the project. We're supportive that this can include that salary component for researchers or students. Yeah, just making sure that the rest of the budget is still answering and capable of addressing those key components of the program or project.
Okay, from Laura, who do we email to get feedback on an idea for an LOI? You email this guy right beside me, David Bysouth. His email is on this slide, david.bysouth@westonfoundation.ca. Okay, a question from Elise. Can you provide some examples of conservation decision makers? For example, Guardians Programs, DFO, what scope is ideal? So yes, government entities would be a decision maker. Guardian programs might be decision makers if they are actively managing their territory or a species, for example, or a population of a species. Really, we're looking for any local, regional, provincial, territorial, or national body that has jurisdiction to be making conservation decisions to improve biodiversity in our geographic area. So as long as you can make the case that your partner has decision-making power and influence on the ground, then that's any scale is fine, really. Okay, a question from Marina. Can co-applicants or collaborators be from countries other than Canada?
I think the answer to this is yes. As long as the principal applicant is based at a CRA qualified donee that's within Canada and the research being conducted is within Canada, then having collaborators or co-applicants from outside Canada is fine. We receive questions about can we use international collaborators if they have very niche expertise in a certain topic that we're interested in, and this would definitely like strengthen the project to have these experts on the team. So again, as long as your research is based in Canada, under the jurisdiction of a CRA qualified donee, then yeah, having international collaborators is fine.
Okay, Nancy asks, so does associated with a registered CRA qualified donee include fiscal sponsor arrangements with CRA qualified donees? We are technically a US registered 501c3, but we actively work within Canada and have staff and operations there as well. We've received grants with our fiduciary in the past. Nancy, I would encourage you to email us with the details of your situation so that we can answer this question by email after having more information about your situation. Sorry that I can't give you an answer right here, but just please email David and we'll respond to you. A question from Felix: is graduate student training a requirement for this grant?
Graduate student training is not a requirement for this grant, but we definitely encourage a training component. And I'm sure our reviewers would be really appreciative to see that that is built in as well. Obviously, we have our Weston Family Awards and Northern Research Scholarship, so we're really excited about like training the next generation of Northern scientists and Northern researchers. So if you have a graduate student training component in your project, we definitely support that as long as there's still that strong research, biodiversity focus, and you're meeting the other project and program requirements as well.
Okay, from Veronique: if from a university, should the principal applicant be a professor?
Yeah, this is another question we've had a few times. So, uh, being a postdoc or a professor is fine. We're really open to anyone being the principal applicant as long as you can demonstrate that the team as a whole is capable of carrying out the project that you've outlined and ensuring the deliverables are met and that those relationships with the conservation decision makers are robust. So to answer your question, no, it doesn't have to be a professor. It could be other people from an academic institution. Again, just ensuring the strength of that team is there as a whole.
And also the money will have to flow through the university. So you would have to be associated with the university to some extent. And I think that answers Jennifer's question, which was right after Veronique's, and it was also, can a postdoc be a principal applicant? So moving on to Rosie's question, the FAQ online states that the projects must start in 2024 in year one. When is the funding expected to be distributed? Well, we're hoping to distribute funds to allow our winners to know in late October, early November, so that funds can be distributed before the end of the year. So we had this question on the last webinar. You won't be able to do a ton of work under this program in 2024, but you could certainly receive funding and start like planning the research in 2024.
And I think another question that we had in the last webinar that's relevant to this one is that you can still have a field season in 2027.
Yeah.
That's included with this funding as well.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is from Joanna. Does this require a field component, or would experimental projects based primarily in a lab be appropriate if using important northern species?
It doesn't necessarily require a field component. If it's a fully lab-based project, we'd really like to see justification for kind of why the methodologies that you're using are the most suitable to answer the question that you're asking, and that your research still has tangible impact for northern geographies, northern communities, northern species. But to answer broadly, no, it doesn't have to be fieldwork based as long as you're using the most relevant and appropriate methodologies to answer that question, and that your research can still move through that knowledge mobilization piece.
Okay, question from Lisa. Is the application criteria of only 3 distinct projects per organization also applied to large organizations such as DFO? Or is this criteria more defined for 3 projects per DFO region, for example? I would consider government entities to be similar to the universities in the sense that you might have multiple researchers working within DFO on very distinct different projects.
We'd also encourage, though, if you know other groups within DFO who are answering or asking similar kind of topics, maybe some of those projects could be merged to strengthen the team as well. But if, like Allison mentioned, if there's very distinct projects happening, I think we would treat that similar to an academic institution.
From Laura, do all projects have to last 3 years?
Projects do not have to last 3 years. What we'd be looking for is like, does the timeline that you've outlined for your project, like, is it feasible and tangible to actually move your research to that decision-making and implementation phase? And if the answer is yes, and you provided a very clear explanation as to why the timeline is what it is, then yeah, the project doesn't have to last 3 years necessarily.
Okay, from Nancy, can geography be nationally rooted in Canada generally? Does there need to be specific northern territories targeted, or can it be more Canada-wide?
I think we would support like a Pan-Canada project as long as it's still focusing on the parts of Canada that we've outlined based on our geographic boundaries. So we're not really interested in results from a project that apply to areas south of the geographic boundaries that we've outlined. But if you're trying to take a Pan-Canada look at like a northern species or a northern process, then we would definitely support that kind of like larger scale Pan-Canada approach. And if you want to send us more specific details about what kind of project you're proposing here, we could probably answer your question in a bit more detail. So feel free to email me with more specific details of that project.
Okay, from Laura, are in-kind contributions relevant and or necessary? They're not necessary. If you're invited to the proposal phase, you'll have to submit a detailed budget, which would probably include any in-kind contributions that you're expecting, and we will score the budget. And so it's helpful to see in-kind contributions for sure, but they're not necessary. We had the question last time also about whether you need to show like matching funds to access this funding, and you do not need to show matching funds. Kevin has asked when the application deadline is. It's June 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern. A question from Allison. Are all Canadian universities qualified as registered CRA donees? Yes, Canadian universities are qualified donees according to the CRA, and we regularly grant to principal investigators working at Canadian universities. Okay, a question from Amana. Does land use change conversion of boreal forest to agriculture and biodiversity meet the scope?
Again, I'm inclined to say yes, but I would encourage you again to send more detailed explanation of your project, and we could provide some more robust feedback on the eligibility. But a project that looks at how an ecosystem changes over time and the impact this could have on biodiversity or different ecological services or processes sounds in theory like it would fall within scope. But again, if you want to send some more details about that project, I could provide you a more substantial answer there.
Okay, Marina asks whether team composition can change between the LOI and the final application. And I think the answer there is yes, but we'd want to know why that composition has changed. And we would want to know that the team still has the strength and expertise to meet the research goals that you've set out for yourself.
Yeah, I think another common question related to that's come in is I'm still working on finalizing my team and the LOI is due in a few weeks. So is that grounds for having a different team during the proposal stage than I would for the LOI stage? And we realize that like some of these northern fieldwork plans and teams can be a bit fluid. So, but again, we'd like to see justification for who you were hoping to include on your team and then who actually gets added at the proposal stage if you're invited to submit one.
Okay, A asks whether the geographical boundary map is going to be available online after.
It is in our program details document on our website, so you can find it there. If you want like the data that was used to generate that map, you can reach out to me and I can send you the shape files from the Government of Canada website that we used. So like to define that boreal line was from a study done in 2009. And that data is publicly available on the Government of Canada website. But again, if you want access to that shape file, I can send that to you if you email me.
Okay, Francis asks, when can we expect to hear about LOI success? And we are anticipating the end of July or early August. We anticipate we have had a lot of interest in this program and we're anticipating a lot of applications. So we want our reviewers to have an adequate amount of time to review the LOIs and really go through them. Okay, a question from Ryan. Are the 3 priority areas ranked or are they each considered equal?
We haven't divided up like a priority for funding priority 1, 2, or 3. We're really just looking for what are the highest quality applications that come forward. So whether that means that we're supporting more in one or the other is kind of dependent on what gets put forward and the quality of those projects, but they are definitely not ranked 1, 2, and 3 in order of importance.
Okay, question from Laura. At the LOI stage, do all team members need to submit any form of approval documents?
Not at the LOI stage. So we're really just looking for that LOI template to be filled out on our website. For the proposal stage, if you're invited, then we'll require more documents to support your project, letters of support from communities or partners you're working with, and we'll go into more detail about that if you're invited to the proposal stage. But for the LOI, we're just looking for that template to be filled out.
Okay, question from Colleen. If our organization is associated with a donee, do they need to be the principal applicant to apply?
Um,
I think Colleen, if you can email us with
Yeah.
the specific example that you're providing, that would be helpful. Because, for example, if you're a principal investigator at a university, you as an individual are not a qualified donee, but the university is. So we would need, I think, your specific situation to be able to answer this question properly. Scott asks, is the year defined as a calendar year or fiscal year? So we, the foundation, operate on a calendar year, but we understand that many of our grantees operate in a fiscal year. And so that's why for this program, it's 3 years, or you can apply for up to 3 years, but it runs on beyond like the 3-year mark, if you know what I mean. So we had the question before, if we start in 2024, we can have a field season in 2025, a field season in 2026, but we can't have a field season in 2027. No, that's not true. You can have a field season in 2027. So if you are on a fiscal year calendar, we can work with that. I hope that's a sufficient answer. Okay, that was a lot of great questions, everyone. So David has a couple more slides. Thank you, everyone, and
Yeah, thanks everyone for your questions. Again, if anything comes up after the fact, or if we told you to follow up, please email me at david.bysouth@westonfoundation.ca. So we're just going to finish up today's webinar by talking about some next steps. First is to submit an LOI. So you're going to want to visit our website at westonfoundation.ca and then navigate to the Northern Science and Research page on our website. Once you're on the Northern Science and Research page, you can go to the Northern Biodiversity Research Program, and then we'd ask that you fill out our LOI template and email that to northern@westonfoundation.ca. And LOIs are due at 5 p.m. Eastern on June 21st. So in terms of some important dates, the information webinar dates are a little bit redundant at this point, but we appreciate all of you for being here on these important dates. The letter of intent deadline, again, is June 1st or June 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern. The full proposal deadline is September 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern, and the anticipated award notice is late October or November of 2024. And with that, we really appreciate all of you for being here today. We're really blown away with all the interest and support for this program, and we really appreciate all your great questions today. And again, if you have any further questions or very specific questions, you can email me at david.bysouth@westonfoundation.ca. And again, we'd encourage you all to visit our website for more information, and to submit your LOI, you can apply at our website. So again, I just want to thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. And we hope a lot of you will end up applying and submitting an LOI towards the end of June. So thanks everyone for being here.